Welcome back. Tonight we have a special bigger picture conversation on nuclear power around the world post-Fukushima. Joining me now are Paul Gunter, the Director of Reactor Oversight Project at Beyond Nuclear, and Kevin Camps, Radioactive Waste Watchdog at Beyond Nuclear. Let's get back to it. I have a graphic of the human body here and the various types of compounds that accumulate in the body. Kevin, I think pretty much everybody knows about the thyroid, and iodine here. That only lasts for 8 days before it starts breaking down. That's the half-life, 8 days?
Half-life, 80-day hazardous persistence, or 160 to be more conservative.
Okay, so at 8 days it's half, at 16 days it's a quarter, so it takes a while. But there are some really concerning ones here. The ovaries, for example, it points out plutonium half-life of 24,000 years. I think it's a little more than the human lifespan. Potassium, or cesium rather, 30 years. In the muscle tissue throughout the body, cesium 30 years. In the bone, radium 1,620 years, strontium 28 years. In our lungs, uranium-233, 162,000 years. Given all these numbers and all this stuff, what are the probabilities that any of these elements and the relative concentrations, that any of these elements have actually started showing up inside the bodies of people in Japan and in the United States?
Well, certainly the Japanese population has been the most directly impacted by Fukushima Daiichi, especially Fukushima Prefecture, the neighboring prefectures, but something on the order of 10% of the Japanese islands are now contaminated with a substance like radioactive cesium-137, which, like you said, has a 30-year half-life, a 300 to 600-year hazardous persistence. It biomagnifies in the food, and then it seeks human muscle tissue. So at Chernobyl, which involved a huge release of radioactive cesium, as well as Fukushima Daiichi, there's a condition now called Chernobyl heart. It's actually the title of an Academy Award-winning documentary film. So in children, heart pathology that should not be seen in children is showing up, including holes in the heart that can be repaired with Gore-Tex surgical patches, but the technology, the training does not exist on the ground in Belarus. So MASH teams of Western doctors have gone over there and done hundreds of these surgeries to try to save these kids' lives. That will now unfold over time around Fukushima.
In fact, you went over and saw this, didn't you? Weren't you involved in the Chernobyl Children's Project?
Yeah, our involvement in Michigan at the time in the late 90s was to bring children from Belarus to Michigan to get them out of the radioactivity. And our niche, because of a friend of ours who taught blind rehab at a university in Kalamazoo, was visually impaired children. And sure enough, I mean, you look at the disease around Chernobyl and it went up after the catastrophe, including visual impairment in children. So they got some medical attention, they got out of the radioactivity for a time. And that's the tragedy of these meltdowns, these disasters, is we have to create new organizations. And literally now there are Fukushima children organizations. And how many of these nuclear catastrophes are we going to put up with?
Paul, are we seeing any evidence that these radioactive elements, these radioisotopes, have made their way to the United States?
I'm not aware of any tests that have shown what we've seen in Japan. For example, there are now tests that are turning up cesium-137 in the urine of Japanese infants. We've not seen that here in the United States at this point.
Is that because we're not looking for it, or is it because it hasn't made it?
I think that certainly the monitoring efforts are lagging behind here in the United States. The cesium-137 has been evidenced in fallout all throughout the Northern Hemisphere, so Iceland as well as New York. So it's not that it's not there, but we've not seen any such evidence as the lab tests that are coming out of Japan right now are indicating.
So Japan is the real horror site.
That's ground zero right now. But as we know, from ground zero, this fallout can travel.
And in fact, Kevin, in this case, with Chernobyl, it blew into the air. With Fukushima, this stuff is being dumped into the ocean. What does that mean?
Well, just last month the news broke that radioactive bluefin tuna had actually been caught off the California coast last August of 2011. The news didn't hit until last month. So there's also a lag in the truth coming out, in scientific studies. But that was because those bluefin tuna had gestated and grown on the coast of Fukushima and then migrated across the ocean. And they swim pretty fast and they swim very far. So by August, they made it. But what's following behind them is this massive plume of radioactive contamination in the ocean that a couple months back had likely reached the Hawaiian shores. Another year or two from now will reach the western coast of North America. Granted, it's going to dilute and dissipate with distance and with volume in the ocean, but this was the biggest release of radioactivity into the ocean in history, and it bioconcentrates in the food chain.
We started out this conversation about the Mark I reactors that we were looking at Fukushima, and we have a graphic here, either number 4 or 5, whichever you guys can easily pop up here. Here we go. This is the seismic. These are nuclear reactors in the United States, and then the red areas, the darker the red area, the higher the probability of it being a seismic zone, an area where there could be earthquakes. How many of these reactors are the same kind of reactors that went down, Paul, in Fukushima? And how old and vulnerable are our reactors, and how many of them are in these earthquake areas?
Well, there are now 23 Mark I boiling water reactors in the United States that are operating, and primarily they're east of the Mississippi, although Cooper Station right here is a Mark I, but throughout Illinois and in New England and the Mid-Atlantic region, we have these Mark Is that are essentially antiquated and dangerous because the designs have been known to be vulnerable since 1972, declared by the Atomic Energy Commission, affirmed again by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission in 1986 as vulnerable to failure. And so any number of events, an earthquake, which could lead to a fire, or just a fire initiating from worker error, like a candle, which started the Browns Ferry fire in 1975. And actually, Fukushima almost had another name, and it could have very well have been Browns Ferry after a fire there cut out all of the cooling systems to the Browns Ferry units, and we narrowly escaped a core melt accident at a vulnerable reactor system like these Mark Is.
And last fall, wasn't it Fort Calhoun that we had floodwaters came within a few inches of shutting down the...
Well, we're right now we're following the Fort Calhoun facility. It's a pressurized water reactor, so it's not a Fukushima design. But the vulnerability this inherent danger in all nuclear power plants could play out in any number of disasters. This plant, for example, there are miles and miles of electrical cable that are underground in vaults that were submerged for months during the flood, and these electrical cables are safety related, and they were never qualified to be wet or submerged for any time. So the Fort Calhoun plant remains shut down now, but clearly we don't know, we doubt that it's safe because they never qualified the electrical cable that stretches out under these plants.
Right. We have a graphic of when basically these things fail, the bathtub curve for nuclear accidents. Kevin, 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl were early on in the lifespan, the break-in phase, it says here, of the reactors, and then the breakdown phase, we're seeing Indian Point and Davis-Besse. Explain what this means.
Sure. Yeah, thanks to Dave Lochbaum at Union of Concerned Scientists for this graph he put together. It shows that there's elevated risk of reactor accidents at brand new reactors like TMI and Chernobyl, which were a year old or less. And the reason for that is bugs in the system, flaws in the design, operator inexperience that gets worked out in a very bad way. Right. That's what happened there. But then what's really significant in the United States now is the ever-growing number of breakdown phase reactors. So these incidents here, Indian Point, February 2000, a steam generator tube bursts in the steam generators. You lose enough steam generator tubes all at once, you have a loss of coolant accident in the core. Another pathway to loss of coolant accident is if you corrode through the reactor lid, which they almost did at Davis-Besse, Ohio, in February of 2002. These were the closest things to breakdown phase disasters we've had.
Wasn't there something very much like this that just happened? Was it San Onofre?
San Onofre is a big concern right now because of the degradation of steam generator tubes, where this, and there are different mechanisms of degradation as well. So the San Onofre nuclear power station had only operated 10 months with these steam generators that are bad designs. Here it was more wear out, but clearly what we're also seeing is bad designs being put into older reactors. Exactly.
Wow, it's remarkable. The United States, what kind? Are we exaggerating the risk? I mean, is this the?
I mean, it's, let me ask you, or, anybody, are you willing to play Russian roulette regardless of how many cylinders are on the gun? I mean, if you load them up and you spin the cylinder and pull the trigger, we're basically involved in this game of Russian roulette now, where we're gambling probabilities against vulnerabilities. And we know the vulnerabilities are increasing as these plants age and as margins of safety wear thinner and thinner and thinner. And now we're also introducing the fact that we have a regulator where the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, NRC, clearly stands more and more for no regulatory control. And as we lose control, as we see plants age and deteriorate, we're on these converging courses for a catastrophe. And that's our concern right now, that this is an inherently dangerous industry that's losing oversight and getting older and deteriorating with new acronyms that we haven't even talked about.
And that, frankly, wouldn't even exist if we, the people, through Price Anderson, didn't insure it. The private market will have nothing to do with it. Paul, thanks you so much. Great to have you. Kevin, thank you for showing up tonight. You can watch this conversation again by going to our website, conversationswithgreatminds.com. Coming up after the